Ethan Parker was a man who had once considered himself fortunate. At 38 years old, he had experienced the highs and lows of life in ways that had left him both seasoned and jaded. He was born and raised in a small town in upstate New York, where he lived an idyllic childhood in the arms of a loving, middle-class family. His father was a high school teacher, and his mother worked as a nurse. Ethan was their only child, and they doted on him, instilling in him values of hard work, honesty, and compassion. Ethan excelled in school, and after graduating with honors, he attended New York University, where he studied business. His ambitions were high, and after earning his degree, he quickly climbed the corporate ladder, eventually landing a high-paying job as a marketing executive for a prominent tech company in Manhattan. His career took precedence over everything else in his life, and for a while that suited him just fine. However, his relentless focus on work came at a cost. At 30, Ethan married Laura, a woman he had met through mutual friends. Laura was kind, intelligent, and supportive, but as the years went on, Ethan's dedication to his career took its toll on their relationship. He spent long hours at the office, and even when he was home, his mind was often elsewhere. The emotional distance between them grew, and after 8 years of marriage, they divorced amicably. Laura moved to California to start a new life, and Ethan was left to navigate the lonely aftermath of their split. The divorce left Ethan questioning his life choices. He was successful, but at what cost? He found himself yearning for something more, something meaningful that could fill the void in his heart. He had the trappings of a successful life, a luxury apartment in Manhattan, a substantial salary, and all the material comforts one could desire, but there was a hollowness that he couldn't shake. He missed the connection he once had with Laura, the warmth of companionship, and the simple joys of sharing life with someone he loved. As time passed, Ethan tried to move on. He dated casually, but nothing ever felt quite right. The women he met were either too focused on their own careers, like he had once been, or they were looking for something he wasn't ready to give. The spark, the connection he craved, eluded him. He began to feel the weight of his solitude more acutely, particularly in the evenings when he returned to his empty apartment. It was during one of those lonely nights that Ethan turned to the internet for solace. He had dabbled in online communities before, but this time he found himself more invested. The anonymity of the internet allowed him to explore sides of himself that he had long suppressed. He joined forums, engaged in discussions about philosophy and art, and even found himself participating in chat rooms where people shared their deepest thoughts and feelings. It was in one of these chat rooms that Ethan first encountered Emily. Emily was a 19-year-old art student from a small town in Pennsylvania. She had grown up in a tumultuous environment, with an absent father and a mother who struggled with addiction. Emily's childhood had been marked by instability, poverty, and neglect, leaving her with deep emotional scars that she carried into her teenage years. Art became her refuge, a way to escape the chaos of her home life and express the pain she couldn't put into words. Emily was a striking young woman with long, dark hair that she often wore loose, cascading down her back. Her pale skin and piercing blue eyes gave her an ethereal quality, but beneath her beauty lay a profound sadness. She was quiet, introspective, and often lost in her own thoughts. Despite her young age, she had an old soul, one that had been weathered by the harsh realities of life. Her art reflected her inner turmoil, dark, abstract pieces that spoke of pain, loss, and the fragility of the human condition. She had a small following online, where she shared her work along with snippets of poetry and musings on life. It was through this online presence that she attracted the attention of older men, some of whom were drawn to her beauty, while others were captivated by the depth of her emotions. Ethan was one of those men. When he first stumbled upon Emily's profile, he was immediately intrigued. Her post resonated with him in a way that nothing else had in years. Her words were raw, honest, and filled with a kind of despair that mirrored his own feelings of emptiness. He found himself returning to her profile again and again, reading her posts, looking at her art, and feeling a strange connection to this young woman he had never met. After a few days of lurking on her profile, Ethan decided to send her a message. It was a simple, casual greeting, nothing too forward, but enough to express his interest in getting to know her. He didn't expect much of a response, considering their age difference and the fact that they lived in different worlds. But to his surprise, Emily replied almost immediately. Their conversation started off light, with Ethan complimenting her art and Emily thanking him for his kind words. But as they continued to talk, their exchange became more personal. Emily shared details about her life, her struggles with her family, her battles with depression, and her feelings of isolation. She told Ethan that she often felt like she didn't belong in this world, that she was an outsider looking in, unable to find her place. Ethan was deeply moved by her openness. He recognized parts of himself in her words: the loneliness, the longing for something more, the sense of being adrift in a world that didn't make sense. He found himself confiding in her as well, sharing his own experiences, his failed marriage, and the emptiness that had followed. Emily listened with empathy, offering words of comfort and understanding. Their connection grew quickly. What started as casual conversation turned into hours-long chats late into the night. Ethan found himself looking forward to their interactions, checking his phone constantly for messages from Emily. She became a bright spot in his otherwise mundane life, a source of excitement and emotional intimacy that he hadn't felt in years. For Emily, the connection with Ethan was something different. She had spent most of her life feeling disconnected from those around her, unable to relate to people her own age. She was drawn to older men who seemed to understand her better, who didn't dismiss her thoughts and feelings as childish or naive. Ethan, with his kindness and attentiveness, was exactly the kind of person she had been searching for: someone who would listen, who would care, who would see her for who she truly was. As their relationship deepened, Emily began to confide in Ethan about her darkest thoughts. She told him about the anger she felt toward her father, who had abandoned her and her mother when she was just a child. She spoke of the resentment she harbored toward her mother, who had never been there for her, who had chosen drugs over her own daughter. Emily's anger was like a storm brewing inside her, and Ethan became her sounding board, the one person she could unleash her emotions on without fear of judgment. Ethan, in turn, tried to be a source of stability for Emily. He offered her advice, encouraged her to pursue her art, and tried to instill in her a sense of hope for the future. He wanted to be the one to save her from her pain, to help her find happiness and fulfillment. But as their relationship grew more intense, Ethan began to develop feelings for Emily that went beyond friendship. He tried to ignore it at first, telling himself that it was just the thrill of the connection, the novelty of talking to someone so young and beautiful. But as time went on, he found himself thinking about Emily more and more. He imagined what it would be like to be with her, to hold her, to kiss her. The age difference that had initially seemed like a barrier now felt insignificant in the face of the connection they shared. Emily, too, felt a growing attachment to Ethan. She was drawn to his maturity, his stability, and the way he made her feel safe. But her feelings were complicated by the anger and resentment that still simmered beneath the surface. She had been hurt so many times before, by people who had promised to love and protect her but had only caused her more pain. The idea of letting someone else into her life, of making herself vulnerable again, was terrifying. Despite these fears, Emily agreed to meet Ethan in person. It was a decision she wrestled with for days, but in the end, her curiosity and longing won out. She wanted to see if the connection they shared online could translate into the real world, if the man who had become such an important part of her life was truly who he seemed to be. Ethan was ecstatic when Emily agreed to meet. He spent days preparing for their encounter, planning the perfect date and imagining how it would go. He envisioned a romantic evening where they would talk and laugh, and he would finally get the chance to see her in person, to hold her hand, to look into her eyes and tell her how much she meant to him. But beneath his excitement, there was also a sense of unease. He knew that their relationship was unconventional, that there were risks involved in pursuing someone so much younger than himself. He worried about what people would think, about the judgment they might face. But more than that, he worried about whether Emily truly felt the same way about him, or if he was just a temporary distraction for her, a way to escape her own pain. On the day of their meeting, Ethan was a bundle of nerves. He arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table by the window where he could watch for her arrival. He ordered a coffee and tried to calm his racing thoughts, but his mind kept drifting. All the possibilities of what could go wrong. What if she didn't show up? What if she wasn't who she said she was? What if she didn't like him in person? But when Emily walked through the door, all of Ethan's doubts melted away. She was even more beautiful than her pictures had suggested, with her long dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders and her blue eyes shining with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She smiled when she saw him, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. They greeted each other awkwardly at first, both of them clearly nervous about the encounter. But as they settled into their conversation, the awkwardness began to fade. They talked about the things they had shared online, about their lives, their hopes, and their fears. Ethan found himself captivated by Emily's intelligence, her wit, and the depth of her emotions. She was everything he had imagined and more. For Emily, the meeting was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent so long building up an image of Ethan in her mind, and now here he was, in the flesh, sitting across from her. He was older than she had expected, with a few more wrinkles around his eyes and a touch of gray in his hair, but he was still handsome, with a warmth in his smile that put her at ease. Finally, Emily stopped and turned to face Ethan. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for something she couldn't quite define. Ethan, sensing her hesitation, reached out to take her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Emily felt a surge of emotion at the simple gesture, and before she could stop herself, she blurted out the words she had been holding back all evening. After their initial meeting, Ethan and Emily's relationship deepened at a rapid pace. What had begun as a hesitant connection online quickly transformed into an intense, all-consuming affair. They started meeting regularly, finding solace in each other's company and escaping the world that seemed, to both of them, increasingly distant and unkind. Ethan was more alive than he had been in years. The thrill of being with Emily, the excitement of their secret meetings, and the deep emotional connection they shared reignited a spark within him that he thought had long been extinguished. He was a man reborn, and the emptiness that had plagued him for so long seemed to dissipate in the light of Emily's presence. He began to neglect his work, spending more and more time with her, desperate to cling to the joy and vitality she brought into his life. For Ethan, Emily represented everything he had been missing: youth, beauty, and a sense of adventure. Her world was a stark contrast to his own, vibrant, unpredictable, and filled with a raw intensity that he found intoxicating. He reveled in the way she looked at him, the way she seemed to need him, and the way she made him feel like the man he once was, before life had worn him down. Yet, as much as Ethan was falling for Emily, there was a part of him that couldn't fully relax. There was a darkness in her, a sense of something lurking beneath the surface that he couldn't quite put his finger on. At times she would withdraw into herself, becoming distant and cold, only to return with an intensity that left him breathless. These mood swings confused and concerned him, but he chose to ignore them, chalking it up to the emotional baggage she carried from her difficult past. Emily, on the other hand, was caught in a web of conflicting emotions. She had been drawn to Ethan initially because he represented stability and safety, something she had never had in her chaotic life. But as their relationship deepened, she found herself becoming more and more entangled in her own feelings. She was torn between her genuine affection for Ethan and the anger and resentment that had been festering inside her for years. Emily's past was a constant shadow over their relationship. She had never known real love or stability. Her childhood was filled with neglect and pain, and her teenage years had been marked by a series of toxic relationships that only deepened her distrust of others. She had learned early on that people couldn't be trusted, that they would always leave, betray, or hurt her in some way. This belief had shaped her view of the world and her approach to relationships. Despite the warmth and affection Ethan showed her, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before he, too, would hurt her. This fear, combined with her deep-seated anger toward the world, created a volatile mix of emotions that she struggled to control. She began to test Ethan, pushing him away and then pulling him back, trying to see how far she could go before he abandoned her. As the weeks went by, the dynamics of their relationship grew increasingly complex. Ethan, blinded by his love for Emily, overlooked the warning signs that something was amiss. He was willing to do anything to keep her happy, to be the one person in her life who wouldn't let her down. He became more possessive, more protective, and more desperate to prove his love to her. He started distancing himself from his friends and colleagues, focusing all his energy on Emily and their relationship. Emily, meanwhile, was beginning to feel suffocated by Ethan's attention. She had never been in a relationship where someone cared so much about her, and instead of making her feel loved, it made her feel trapped. The more Ethan tried to protect her, the more she resented him for it. She began to see him not as a partner, but as yet another person who wanted to control her, to mold her into something she wasn't. This resentment simmered beneath the surface, manifesting in subtle ways. Emily would pick fights over small things, criticize Ethan for being too clingy, and lash out at him for no apparent reason. Ethan, desperate to keep the peace, would apologize and try to make things right, but nothing he did seemed to satisfy her. The more he tried to placate her, the more distant she became. Despite the growing tension, there were moments when the connection between them seemed as strong as ever. They would have passionate, heated conversations about art, life, and their shared disdain for the superficiality of the world around them. In those moments, Ethan felt like they were kindred spirits, united against a world that neither of them truly belonged to. But these moments were fleeting, and the darkness in Emily's eyes would always return, pulling her back into a place that Ethan couldn't reach. Ethan began to notice changes in Emily's behavior that disturbed him. She started drinking more heavily, often showing up to their meetings already tipsy. Her moods became increasingly erratic, swinging from intense affection to cold indifference in the span of minutes. She would disappear for days at a time without explanation, only to return with vague excuses and a distant look in her eyes. When Ethan pressed her for answers, she would become defensive, accusing him of trying to control her and invading her privacy. These incidents left Ethan feeling confused and helpless. He wanted to help Emily, to be there for her in the way she needed, but he didn't know how. The more he tried to understand her, the more she pushed him away. He began to suspect that there was something she wasn't telling him, something dark and troubling that she was hiding. But whenever he tried to broach the subject, Emily would shut down, refusing to talk about it. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Ethan finally confronted Emily about her behavior. He told her that he was worried about her, that he couldn't stand the way she was shutting him out. He begged her to let him in, to tell him what was going on so he could help her. But instead of opening up, Emily lashed out at him with a venomous fury that took him by surprise. "Help me. You think you can help me," she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "You don't know anything about me, Ethan. You're just like everyone else, thinking you can swoop in and fix everything with your money and your nice words. But you don't understand. You never will." Ethan was stunned by her outburst. He had never seen her so angry, so full of rage. He tried to calm her down, to tell her that he just wanted to be there for her, but she wouldn't listen. She stormed out of his apartment, leaving Ethan alone, bewildered and heartbroken. After that night, things between them grew even more strained. Emily became increasingly distant, avoiding Ethan's calls and canceling their plans at the last minute. When they did meet, she was cold and detached, barely engaging in conversation. Ethan tried everything he could think of to bring her back to him, but nothing seemed to work. It was as if a wall had gone up between them, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break through. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's anxiety grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. He began to have nightmares, dark, disturbing dreams in which he would find himself alone in a vast, empty space, searching for Emily but never finding her. In these dreams, he would hear her voice, calling out to him, but when he tried to follow it, he would always end up lost, surrounded by shadows. The more Ethan dwelled on these dreams, the more they began to consume his waking thoughts. He started to obsess over Emily's behavior, replaying their conversations in his mind, searching for clues that might explain what was happening. He became paranoid, convinced that there was something sinister lurking beneath the surface of their relationship, something that Emily was keeping from him. Desperate for answers, Ethan began to dig deeper into Emily's past. He searched through her social media profiles, trying to piece together the story of her life before they met. What he found only deepened his concern. Emily's posts from before they met were dark and cryptic, filled with references to pain, loss, and betrayal. She had a history of toxic relationships, and there were hints that she had been involved with older men before. But there was nothing concrete, nothing that explained the darkness that seemed to be consuming her. Ethan also noticed that Emily's online presence had changed since they started dating. She had become more secretive, posting less frequently and sharing fewer details about her life. When she did post, her messages were often vague and unsettling, filled with references to death, despair, and the inevitability of loss. These posts troubled Ethan deeply, but when he confronted Emily about them, she brushed off his concerns, accusing him of being paranoid. As the tension between them continued to build, Ethan found himself at a breaking point. He didn't know how to reach Emily, how to help her, or even how to protect himself from the emotional turmoil their relationship was causing him. He was in love with her, but that love was beginning to feel like a curse, something that was dragging him down into a darkness he couldn't escape. One night, after another failed attempt to talk to Emily about her behavior, Ethan found himself sitting alone in his apartment, consumed by a sense of dread. He knew that something was terribly wrong, but he didn't know what to do about it. As he sat there, staring out the window into the city's night sky, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Emily. "I need to see you. Now." Ethan's heart raced as he read Emily's message. The abruptness of her request and the stark tone of her words filled him with a sense of foreboding. He had been waiting for this moment, knowing deep down that something had to give, that their relationship couldn't continue on its current path without something breaking. And now, it seemed, that moment had arrived. Without wasting any time, Ethan grabbed his coat and headed out the door. The night was cold, a biting wind cutting through the streets as he made his way to the address Emily had sent. It was a place he didn't recognize, an unfamiliar part of the city on the outskirts where the lights were dim and the buildings old and worn. The farther he walked, the more the unease in his stomach grew. He tried to calm himself, to think logically about what Emily might want to talk about, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the darkness in her eyes, the secrets she had been keeping. When he finally arrived at the location, he found himself standing in front of a dilapidated apartment building. The paint was peeling off the walls, and the windows were dark, save for a single light glowing dimly from a window on the third floor. Ethan hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should turn back, but the pull of Emily's message was too strong. He had to know what she wanted, what had driven her to reach out to him so suddenly. The building's interior was as decrepit as its exterior. The hallway was narrow and poorly lit, with a faint smell of mildew lingering in the air. Ethan's footsteps echoed off the walls as he climbed the creaking staircase to the third floor. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. What if Emily was in trouble? What if she had finally reached a breaking point and needed his help? Or worse, what if she had lured him here for some darker purpose? When he reached the door, he paused, taking a deep breath before knocking. The door opened almost immediately, and there stood Emily, looking more fragile and vulnerable than he had ever seen her. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying, and her hands trembled as she reached out to him. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for coming." Ethan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, with an air of neglect that matched the building's exterior. A single lamp cast a dim light over the room, illuminating the shadows that clung to the corners. Ethan's eyes darted around, taking in the disarray: the unmade bed, the empty bottles on the table, the torn curtains that barely covered the windows. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, his voice full of concern. "Why did you ask me to come here?" Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the window, staring out into the night as if searching for something beyond the glass. Ethan could see the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders hunched forward, as if she were carrying an unbearable weight. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I never wanted it to come to this." Ethan's heart sank. The fear that had been gnawing at him for weeks now reared its head, filling his mind with dark thoughts. "Come to what?" he asked, stepping closer to her. "Emily, please talk to me. Whatever it is, we can get through it together." Emily turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No, Ethan, we can't. You don't understand. I've been lying to you about everything." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had suspected that Emily was hiding something, but hearing her admit it was a different kind of pain. "What do you mean, lying?" he asked, his voice strained. About what? About me, Emily replied, her voice cracking. About who I am, about why I reached out to you. It was all a lie, Ethan, from the very beginning. Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. He had known there was something off, but he had never imagined the betrayal would be so deep. Why, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do that? Emily sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. Because I was angry, she said, her voice muffled. I was angry at the world, at everyone who had ever hurt me, and I wanted to take that anger out on someone. You were just there. You seemed like the perfect target, successful, stable, everything I wasn't. I thought if I could make you fall for me, if I could make you care, then I could take something from you, something that would make me feel like I had control, like I wasn't just some broken, powerless girl. Ethan stared at her, his mind reeling. The woman sitting in front of him was a stranger, someone he barely recognized. The Emily he had fallen in love with, the woman who had brought him so much joy and pain, was nothing more than a mask. So, it was all a game, he asked, his voice hollow. Everything we shared, everything we went through, none of it was real. Emily looked up at him, her eyes pleading. No, Ethan, it wasn't just a game. Not anymore. I never expected to feel the way I do about you. I didn't think I could care about anyone, not after everything I've been through. But you got under my skin. You made me feel things I didn't want to feel, things I wasn't ready to deal with. And that's why I had to push you away, why I had to end it before it got any worse. Ethan's heart ached as he listened to her. He wanted to believe her, to believe that there was some part of their relationship that had been real, but the pain of her betrayal was too much. Why didn't you just tell me? He asked, his voice shaking. Why didn't you let me in? I would have understood, Emily. I would have tried to help you. Because I didn't think you could, Emily replied, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't think anyone could. I've been hurt so many times, by so many people, that I didn't believe there was any way out. I thought the only way to survive was to take control, to hurt others before they could hurt me. But you made me doubt that. You made me think that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something different, and that terrified me. Ethan stood there, torn between his love for Emily and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that coursed through him. He had opened his heart to her, let her into his life in a way he hadn't with anyone else, and now he was faced with the reality that it had all been based on a lie. But even in his pain, he couldn't ignore the part of him that still cared for her, that still wanted to believe there was something worth saving. What do you want from me, Emily? He asked, his voice raw. Why did you call me here tonight? Emily wiped her eyes, her expression one of despair. I don't know, she admitted. I couldn't keep lying to you. Not anymore. I had to tell you the truth, even if it meant losing you. I don't expect you to forgive me, Ethan. I don't even expect you to understand. But I couldn't keep going on like this, pretending to be someone I'm not, living this lie. I had to let you go. Ethan's heart broke at her words. Despite everything, he couldn't help but feel a deep sadness for the woman sitting in front of him, the woman who had been so damaged by her past that she couldn't see a way out. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her and tell her that everything would be okay, but he knew that would be a lie. Nothing about this situation was okay, and there were no easy answers. I don't know what to say, Ethan said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. I don't know how to process all of this. I thought I knew you, Emily. I thought what we had was real, but now I don't know what to believe. It was real, Emily insisted, her voice urgent. At least it became real. I know I lied to you and I know I hurt you, but I swear, Ethan, my feelings for you, they're real. I care about you more than I ever thought I could care about anyone. But that doesn't change the fact that I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair as he tried to make sense of everything. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave and never look back, but another part of him couldn't let go of the connection they had shared, even if it had been built on lies. He was torn between his love for Emily and the pain of her betrayal, and he didn't know which would win out. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft and full of sorrow. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily. Not right now. Maybe not ever. But I do know that I can't just walk away from you. Not like this. You need help, real help. And if you're willing to get it, then maybe, just maybe, there's a way forward. But I can't do this alone. And I can't keep playing these games.